Science mobile app currently have 18,000 subscribers in India and also in 12 other countries. We are looking for experts like you who can deliver an expert talk for 15 to 20 minutes in your current research area. Or you can also present your profile so that interested collaborators will approach you for consultancy, research progress, or academic collaboration. Just accept our invitation, so that you broadcast your video in the appropriate groups and also in mobile app with timely notification to all the users. This helps to share the knowledge to the required students, scholars, etc. Prepare the PPT content and recorded video with any screen recorder software, or simply send your selfie video mentioning your expertise, so that we broadcast that video to the users. As said, this will help generating new research collaborations, presenting your work, sharing your ideas, and also publicizing your expertise and skills. Please see the video is of 10 to 15 minutes. We look forward for your positive response. Contact us today. Thank you.
Effective teaching, guys, fellow teachers, in any setup, be it a face to face classroom interaction or a virtual learning environment, always requires what? Mastery of the subject matter. We cannot afford to have a teacher who doesn't know his or her subject well. The only changed here, the only thing that changed here is the manner of delivery. But the same thing, the teacher has to be a master of his course, of the subject that he or she handles. Also, very much stressed and emphasized at this point is our ability to engage the students in the teaching learning process. It becomes more pronounced. The need of becomes more pronounced in a virtual learning environment, because imagine you are teaching at the comfort of your home and your students would be like this. How to get attract their attention and sustain their interest all throughout the lesson. So there's simply a lot of distractions at home that your students will be exposed to as they attend your class. So how are we going to engage our students' attention? How are we going to attract their interest and sustain their curiosity in order for them to be engaged in our discussion and our lesson? Two things are required. First, our ability to employ or to use effective teaching strategies. How you deliver your lesson, how you facilitate the teaching learning experience. Another is the use of instructional material. So as we go along with the sharing this morning, we'll be talking of these two things. What are the most appropriate instructional material to use in different modalities of learning, and what are the most fitting uh, teaching strategies to be employed? Let's begin. Let's define what instructional materials are. Brian Tomlinson, one of the leading experts in instructional material development, defines instructional material as anything, take note of the word, fellow teachers, it could be anything which a teacher deliberately uses in order to increase the learner's skills and or knowledge. It is whatever we bring into our classroom with the intention of using that thing to increase the student's skills and or knowledge. From this definition, these things could be considered as instructional material. A printed text, even gadgets could be used to increase the student's skills and or knowledge, or a newspaper, a real, an authentic text, so printed materials. Furthermore, instructional material is defined as something that provides detailed specification of content, even in the absence of a syllabus. Especially for basic education, the students have no tangible idea of what a curriculum or what a syllabus or what even a lesson plan. They don't have the chance to see your lesson plan as a teacher. But the instructional material, something that we use in our class, Okay, this is what the students deal with. This is what is true as the part of our curriculum and plan for our students. That's why IMs are said to be the most important element within the curriculum and the most tangible and visible aspect of it. As I said, the students might not have seen the curriculum or might not have seen your syllabus or lesson plan, but it is the instructional material that they use every day. That's the most tangible part of the curriculum. Now, there are different types of instructional material that we use in our classroom. First, the most common among us is the textbook. Anyone who handles a course or a subject uses a textbook. It serves as the main reference for the entire course. It contains readings, teaching points, drills, activities, tasks for everyday lessons. So we're familiar with this. The second type of instructional material is known as the workbook or the skill book. It usually accompanies a textbook. It provides exercises and drills for specific skills. Take note of the name, workbook or skill book. Work and skill. They both refer to the tasks, to the activities or practice part. Okay? So this book presents reinforcement and remedial activities to support lessons and textbook. So it normally comes with a textbook. If the textbook is the input, the lecture part of the book or the instructional material, the workbook or skill book serves as the practice. Okay, the practice, the drills part of the book. Now, the trend is these two are fused into one. They are combined together, and you have the work text. Ever heard of that? The work text. It's a combination of the textbook and the workbook. Work text, wherein there are inputs, the lecture part provided by the teacher, and then at the end of each lesson there are activities and exercises which students would remove from the paper, from the book, and they would submit it to the teacher. They would detach it, right? They are detachable, and that serves as the workbook part of the work text. Finally, the instructional material which would be very much appropriate for virtual learning environment is known as the module. Okay, the module is known as a self-learning kit. Self-learning kit because it promotes independent learning. In a way, we can say that this instructional material makes the teacher a little bit unnecessary. Okay, as I said, we are no longer in a face-to-face interaction within the same room, so we cannot observe, we cannot uh, guide our students step by step. So this module will be used by the students even in the absence of the teacher. That's why it's self-learning kit in their own pace, no? So it promotes independent learning. Now, just a point of clarification, fellow teachers. The intention of using a module is to teach our students how to learn on their own. Okay, how to learn on their own. It promotes responsibility in their own learning, but it doesn't mean that when you use a module and you let your students use it, they are already independent learners. No, we intend to make them independent learners with the use of the module. That's why we do some guidance here and monitoring. Later on, I will explain the role of teachers in the use of modules. Also, module contains pre-tests, okay, for the students to see how they progress, post-test, okay, lesson inputs, uh, just like in textbook, exercises and drills, very much like in a workbook. Let's have another definition of module, this time from Russell. Russell defines a module as an instructional package dealing with a single conceptual unit of a subject matter. Meaning, we prepare a module for each lesson, for each topic. So let's say you will have a module for each week. It's up to you. Or you can have a module for 2 weeks. Your point of coverage is the lesson. It's up to the teacher who would assign the module. Okay? But the thing is, it should be dealing with minimal, single, if it is possible, a single conceptual unit. When did it begin? Where did modules originate? It was in the late 1960s when a group of lecturers from Texas, USA began experimenting mediated instruction combined with behavioral objectives and interclass groupings. Notice the highlighted words. It's a mediated instruction, meaning to say it's not a face-to-face class. There would be we will be using a medium or a media in delivering the instruction. So more often than not, we use technology. So this is a technology mediated instruction. There are behavioral objectives. There are what we intend to produce in our students, and it is used for interclass groupings. Later, I'll talk about class size. It was only in late 1990s when American professors began to use modules in teaching regular courses. It is after several researches have been done in order to measure the effectivity of using a module. They found that, of course, there are divided agreement. There are conflicting agreements, conflicting opinions about the use of modules. But there are researches that have found that the use of module lessen the absenteeism and engage more fully the students, and it promotes longer retention of the lessons that students obtain through modules. What are the characteristics of learning using a module? First, it uses contained mediated instructional techniques, texts, and reference materials, demonstrations, and group activities. If you're going to read this characteristic, it's almost similar to a face-to-face classroom. Yes, and the only thing that spells the difference is the word mediated. Again, it's almost similar to what we do inside the class, but the means of delivery is we'll be using a media or a medium in order to do that. So a module is a mediated instruction. Number two, a modular learning is designed both for individuals and for small groups. Okay, so it is possible to be used for a tutorial basis or for small classes. What about if you have a large class? Later on, we'll consider the class size, but it's also possible to be used. Finally, number three, it uses verbal and visual elements. Later on, Sir Paul will teach you how to do what are the parts of a module. But these are the important elements. First is the verbal element. Verbal element pertains to the inputs on language expressions, functions, language items, grammar, and tenses. So this is the input part, the lecture part of the teacher. Okay. Visual elements, on the other hand, consists of diagrams, graphs, charts, flow charts, tables, and pictures. This is equally important. Let me emphasize that. In our face-to-face classroom, we may not use a lot of visual elements. We may not be resorting to a lot of visual aids. But in a module, they are very much needed. Why? Again, when the students use the modules, they are relying heavily on what they can see on them, because you are not around to guide them, to explain it to them. So the visual elements would help them to grasp the concepts you are explaining using the verbal elements. Okay, we use the visual elements, the diagrams, the graphs, the charts, and the pictures, in order to explain further the things we explain using the verbal elements. Now, just a point of reminder: the verbal elements and the visual elements are not all given in a module. Some parts of a module are really intentionally left blank or unfilled, so that it would be the practice part for our students. That would be their part of exploration, and that would be their way of testing their knowledge to fill in those missing parts. What are the things to consider when we are preparing a module? First, teaching goals or the learning goals for our students. Second is the class size. Third, the role of the teacher. What would be our role? How is it different from the face-to-face classroom? Fourth, educational technology. Fifth, the content of our module. And finally, the evaluation or assessment of learning. Let's take this one by one. Are you ready? Okay, let's begin. When we say goals, we are actually referring to our students' learning outcomes. What do we intend them to learn? What do we intend them to gain or get from using the module? But the second part of the goal is the teaching methods. What do we need to do in order to bring forth the learning outcomes? Okay, so you have to consider these two things: the learning outcomes, the learning aims, what we aim to accomplish among our students, and how are we to accomplish it, our teaching methods. So these are questions we need to reflect on since you are toying the idea of coming up with a module. So first you have to deal with the question, what do your students supposed to learn and able to do? Are you planning to come up with a module? You answer that question first. What do I intend my students to learn from using this module, and what skills? What do I want them to learn what do I want my students to learn to do or able to do using the module? But it is not confined or limited to knowledge and skills. The second question you have to deal with is how would be their thinking and behavior changed by the lesson? So primarily, it's a matter of attitude. Attitude is how we view things, how we perceive something. And learning will only be possible, I would say, it will only be more effective if our students' attitude towards it has been changed and improved. The same thing with the use of online learning. A lot of us are not used to it. A lot of us already have prejudices about it, right? We concluded it's difficult even without trying it. That's how we excuse. These are our excuses in not using it. We already jumped to the conclusion that this will not be successful. This is difficult. Students cannot do it without even trying it. All right. So the first people, I guess, we have to change the attitude towards these modalities of learning are we, the teachers. We need to because we cannot just let another year pass without doing something. Yes, this might not be perfect. The thing that we are trying will not be perfect, but as they say it, everything begins. Uh, Nothing begins as perfect as it is. So we need to try it. We need to do something about it. So the same thing with our students. Kaya sabi ko po kanina, that the teachers have to change their attitude towards learning using these modalities because the students can feel that. Nararamdaman ng estudyante yun kung ang teacher ayaw rin naman pala niya ng online learning, parang hindi rin sila engaged, hindi rin interesado si teacher. So the more our students. Okay po? So these are the things we have to consider. What else? Also, friends, in considering the goals of learning using our module, do not forget to put into account, to factor in the theories of learning. What are this? Let me talk briefly about this. Did you know that before the 20th century, we never had these clear, coherent theories on how humans learn? Yes, that's right. But teaching has been here for a while. Teaching has been here for a while, but we have never looked into the output, how humans learn. Different people, different experts and masters throughout history try different methodologies in teaching, but they never look into the process of learning. How do people learn? But teaching will always be determined by the learning part. Okay? Learning will always shed light on how are we going to do our teaching. But thanks to psychology, when it gained some respect in the academy in the 20th century, that we gained some more insights in learning about how humans learn. There are actually three major theories on how we learn. The first one is known as behaviorism. Ever heard? Behaviorism, it has become prominent because of Ivan Pavlov in Russia and Boris Frederick Skinner in the US. So you're familiar with their dog and their different animals they use, you know? What is behaviorism? This is a simple but a very powerful theory on how humans learn. According to this theory, learning is just a habit formation. Okay? Experts and proponents of behaviorism assert that learning is a habit formation. The equation is behavior equals stimulus plus response. You keep on doing the same thing, and it will be learned. After a while. Okay, that's why habit formation. That's why there are drills. That's why there are exercises. That's why we have routinary activities in schools. It all came from behaviorism theory. Okay. Another theory of learning is called as cognitivism. Ever heard? In other literature, it's also known as mentalism, mental from the mind. So, what is cognitivism or mentalism? If behaviorism believes that learning is habit formation, learning seems to be from outside in, isn't it? Because we stimulus response. Stimulus is from the outside. It's outside in. But cognitivism is the vice versa, the opposite. It's inside out. Meaning to say, for cognitivism, learning is not a habit formation, but hypothesis formation. According to the proponents of this theory, human beings already have hypotheses in their minds. That's how the mind works, according to them. We already have ideas in our head. We just use the clues outside, the stimulus outside as clues in order to make sense of it. Okay? So learning is inside out. Can you see the difference? Again, behaviorism is outside in, okay? Habit formation. Cognitivism is inside out. Hypothesis formation. Use your hypothesis in order to learn. The third theory, friends, is known as constructivism. I guess you have already heard it. Constructivism combines the two major points of this theory of the previous theories. According to constructivism, yes, human beings may have theories about, I may have hypotheses about something, but still needs a stimulus outside, and you need to use them together in order to construct meaning of something. That's why it's called constructivism. So in learning, there is an interactive relation between your idea and about the stimulus or an outside external factor. Okay? So now, these are the theories: behaviorism, cognitivism, and constructivism. But we should never forget the fourth point, though it's not really a theory, but more of a learning factor. And what is it? The affective factor. Ever heard? It has something to do with our emotions. It has something to do with our feelings, right? We human beings, we tend to believe that we are rational beings. We'd like to believe that all our decisions are based on our critical thinking and so and on. But if you would notice, most of our decisions are primarily affected by the way we feel. Okay? So what's the point of a affective factor? We teach learners. They are human beings. They are not robots. They are not machines. They have these feelings and emotions. And these feelings and emotions surely have a great and important factor in learning. Primarily, what's the important thing about affective factor? The motivation. Fellow teachers, no matter how much effort you put into teaching, but if the students are not properly motivated, if they cannot see the relevance of what they are learning or getting from your teaching, and how they don't know how to use it and where to use it, sorry, but your learning will still not be effective. So the students have to see the relevance of what they are learning, where to use it, what can I get from it. Okay, the students have to have this motivation to learn. They should understand clearly what could they get, what benefit could they get from attending or using the modules that they use. Okay, so we have to consider this in setting up the goals for our modular learning. And another is the teaching methods, because our strategies and how to deliver the lecture, the lesson, and how to facilitate the students using the module, that would be a very important consideration in preparing a module. In preparing a goal or a learning goal, we're always told, since our undergraduate training, that it should be a SMART objective. And what do we mean by SMART? Of course, it should be specific, it should be meaningful, it should be appropriate, it should be realistic, and it should be testable. Let me talk a little more about this. First, your learning objective should be specific. What does it mean? It should provide details. It should be clear both to the teacher and the students what do they expect to get from it. Okay? So we should be on the same ground. We should be on the same page. We should understand each other what we intend to accomplish. Okay? use by means of the objective. So it clarifies what do we intend to accomplish at the end of this course. The other characteristic of an effective objective is it's meaningful. When you say meaningful, it is written in language that is understandable to students and other staff. Further, meaningful in the sense that students can relate to it. The students can see clearly how is it relevant to their lives. When you say relevant, it has uses, practical uses. Okay? You teach them something, the students question, the students ask it in their minds, where am I to use it? Okay, you teach them how to write email, where to use it. You don't learn it for the sake of learning, but you learn it because you're going to use it eventually in real life context. So it answers the question why. So if earlier specific answers the question, what do I want them to learn? Meaningful answers the question, why do they have to learn it? You get the point? Why do they have to learn it? The third one is that it should be appropriate. It suits the learner's abilities and experience and satisfy the required standards. When we say satisfy the required standards, we are referring here to the standards of your institution, of your school, or as prescribed by the Commission on Higher Education or the Department of Education. So there are standards, there are competencies prescribed by these institutions and by your school or your department. And also, it should be appropriate to our learners' present capabilities and abilities. What do I mean by present ability? It should be appropriate in the sense that it's not way too beyond their present ability and not way too below. Okay? Hindi siya sobrang hirap, sobrang advanced, hindi na naman siya sobrang below the level of their competency. Why is that so? If an objective, if a learning objective in even a task is way too beyond, the tendency is the students would lose interest. Why? They would even give up and end up saying it's not for me because they find it too difficult. But if it is way too below, it's too easy for them, they would get bored. Okay? They would get bored. Surely. So these are the tendencies. If it is too difficult, they would lose interest. If it is too easy, they would not be motivated. They would get bored. There's no challenge, right? So it should be a little bit higher than their level of competency. Okay, what is advised by the experts is that it's a little bit higher than their present ability. Not way too beyond and not way too below, just a little bit higher than their present. Why not at their level? Because there will be no learning, right? There will be no learning if you just go to their level. It should be a little bit higher than their present ability. That's what we mean by appropriate. Next, it should be realistic. Friends, remember the situation our students are in, right? They are confined to their homes, they are quarantined in their homes, there's limited movement, some of their parents lost their jobs. So it should be achievable given their available resources. Nasa bahay lang, anong pwedeng gamitin? Limited ang movement, may time constraints. Okay? Matatapos ba nila yan given the time that you provided them or you give them? It should be realistic. And finally, it should be testable. When you say testable, it can be assessed. When we teach something, we could see whether the students really learn it. So that's why we can create some tests or some activities to see whether students can demonstrate learning. Okay, so it's testable. So that's what we mean by SMART: specific, meaningful, appropriate, realistic, and testable. Next, the next consideration, this is what I've been talking a while ago, the class size. So in a physical face-to-face interact classroom, we can manage no matter what's the size of the class. No, we can do something about it. But if in a virtual learning environment, in an online or blended class, size would matter. Size would be an issue. Okay, so we have to consider is it an individual or group lesson? Would the module be used for individual, a tutorial basis, or a group will be using it? If it is a group, would there be a large or small group? In a large class, some tip or suggestion. In a large class, you can assign activities which will be done by the entire class. They could attend lecture like this, even if they are 300. We can do that because it is primarily inputs. Okay, no interaction. But if there would be interaction, it is suggested that we divide the large class into clusters. Okay, into clusters. In my graduate school now, I have 20 plus graduate students pursuing their masters. They are 20. In lecture, they are all in my virtual classroom in a Google Meet. But in some activities that require interaction, I divide them into clusters. So 4 members in each cluster, 5 members in each cluster. There would be more interaction in that case. So we can divide them into small groups. Okay. Also, in class size, we have to consider if it is a virtual learning environment or technology mediated, or is it a face-to-face using a module, using a module. What would be the role of the teacher in this kind of learning modality? Mababago rin po, nabago kasi yung means ng delivery ng trabaho ng ating pagtuturo. Sigurado yung role natin as teacher will also be changed or affected. There are 3 major roles a teacher has to perform when teaching using a module. First is directing. It is where the teacher would provide a lot of inputs. The teacher has to explain and clarify to the students the objectives and the coverage of the syllabus and how would be the schedule and so forth and so on. Inputs, directing. This will be done at the initial part of the school year or the semester. When the semester begins and as you go on, the teacher would shift now into more guiding. Guiding because the students would now be learning using the module. They would intend to learn on their own, so at their own pace. The teacher would be there to provide some guidance, okay, some feedbacks. So in here, feedbacking would be an important element. The teacher would have to provide some suggestions, tips, okay, some more inputs for our students, but more on the guiding part. And finally, towards the end of the semester or towards the end of the use of the module, the teacher's job will shift into monitoring. Okay? So, if you would see, tatlo rin po yung parts ng lesson technically, Presenting, part siya ng directing, present, practice, guiding, and then produce. When the students are already producing, demonstrating their knowledge of something, the teacher's job is to monitor. Dito na papasok mga kasamang teacher yung assessment. Dito na rin natin sila bibigyan ng mga activities na gigradean. Okay? Dito na papasok yung assessment sa monitor. Directing, guiding, and monitoring. What are the teaching methods that we can use when using a module? Pwede pa rin mag-lecture. Tulad dito, nagle-lecture po ako sa inyo. Sa kanya-kanya tayong bahay. But we can provide lectures. Okay, ang issue ng iba, wala kaming internet. The teacher can record the lecture and provide the students. They can pick it up from the institution. They can watch it on their TV. May TV naman siguro sa bahay. Okay, the same thing with seminar, tutorial, demonstration. You can also tape yourself, record yourself while doing the demonstration. Or, as suggested by some experts, you can also provide your student with some links. Especially if students have internet connection, you do the lecture part, okay? And for the demonstration, you can provide them some links because there are already available many materials on the internet that you could use for our students' learning. You can also ask them to do some experiment and laboratory, but just a word of caution, we should exercise all the necessary care here because we are risking a lot of things when students perform their experiments at home. So we shouldn't allow them to do experiments that may cause some trouble and accident or danger. So workshop, role play or simulations, especially for skills, and of course projects. Okay, assigning them projects that they would do through the course of using the module. Educational technology, what do we need to consider? Is your using a module supported or mediated by gadgets? Kasi let's clarify this, You'll be preparing a module and we're going to publish it. May printed material po ng module. Pero syempre, hindi kasi module lang. It can be mediated by gadgets for the inputs. Yun po yung mga lecture part, yung input ng teacher, or meron ba silang internet connection. Now, kung wala nang mga yan, wala namang makapaghihinto sa pagtuturo kung meron pa rin printed modules. Supplemental lang naman po sila, yung gadgets and internet connection. In preparing and considering the content of our module, we have to consider the minds-on part, meaning yung theory-based, yung lecture part, and of course, the hands-on, the practically based. Ito yung major parts ng ating module, yung tinuturo natin, yung laman, yung inputs, yung lecture, and how to do it. That's the hands-on or the practically based. Assessment. This will be the last consideration. Many teachers in a face-to-face interaction do not assess their students. Okay? I'm also guilty of that in my early years of teaching. Uh, I'm not into testing the students' learning. Ako basta turo. Pero hindi pala kompleto yung picture. Teaching will never be complete without testing. Okay? Teaching will never be complete without testing. Why? Because this is essential for students to demonstrate their learning. We don't have an idea whether they really learned what you taught unless you test them or you assess their learning. And it is also important for teachers, for us to see where to provide additional inputs or remedial instruction or more motivation if necessary. Okay? So some examples of valid assessment or valid testing. If your outcome, remember, the outcome here, the category outcome is the same with the objective. Okay, right? The teaching aims. If your objective or outcome is to teach a skill, your methodology, your method, the content or learning should be a detailed directions. Ito yung input ng teacher, magtuturo siya how to do the skill. Demonstrate it. There should be demonstration, how to do it, followed by practice. So after you present, there would be practice. Now, question, do we have to rate or give our students some grades right away when they are practicing? No, it is suggested that we give feedbacks instead of grade when they are on this phase. Okay? Grading or rating our students' performance would come in the assessment. Ito po sa last column. When we observe them performing the skill that they have just learned. Nakuha po, presentation, practice, and performance or production. We should always provide our students with feedbacks. In the previous webinar with one school in Negros, noong Monday, nag-webinar din po kami sa Negros, may isang faculty doon nagtanong sa amin, sir, do we need to grade? Do we need to give grades in all students' activities using a module? My answer is no. There are activities which you don't have to rate, but what you should provide are feedbacks. Why? Because students have no idea whether they are doing it right. Diba? Ang pinakamasakit sa estudyante, yung submit ng something, pasa sila ng pasa ng pinapapasa ni teacher, pero wala silang idea kung tama ba yung mga pinaggagawa nila. Wala namang bumalik kasi may feedbacks or comments or suggestions from the teachers. So on the practice part, provide feedbacks. On the production part or assessment part, provide grades. Yun naman natin sila grade. Okay po, another example. If the outcome or objective is for the students to illustrate theory, okay, to give understanding, ang pagtuturo natin dyan is are the appropriate theories or what to do in order to understand or choose the appropriate theory. The assessment would be a test requiring the student's demonstration or application of the theory, probably written. It could be a short essay for us to see whether students can grasp the concepts that they have learned from the theories. Another, if the outcome or objective is to write a report, we should provide, ito po yung tip ko kanina, no? Kung tinuturuan niyo yung batang gumawa ng report or let's say to write an email or write a letter or whatever written outputs, provide them with format. Ang tawag po natin sa English doon text types. Text types. Magkakaiba kasi ang text types. Iba yung format ng newsletter, iba yan sa format ng application letter. Iba yan sa format ng menu. Iba yan sa format ng cooking book. So, text types, provide mo sila ng genre. Ito yung parts, ito ng pinasusulat mo. Provide them with example. Okay? And then let them try it, practice. Okay? And then assessment, they produce their own eventually. Okay po? So, kung mapapansin nyo, fellow teachers, the outcome, content, and assessment, they all They are all aligned. They are all coherent. So observe coherence in learning outcomes or objectives, teaching methods, and assessment. Dapat nag-agree po silang tatlo. Lagi. Some guidelines, please bear with me, konti na lang po ito. First, build on foundation. When using a module, always remember to start with what the students can relate on. Begin with what is already known to them before you introduce them to something unknown or unfamiliar. Ganun naman po lagi yung pagtuturo, ano? We activate their schema. Dapat magsimula ka sa alam nila, sa pamilya sila, before you introduce the lesson which is new to them. Next, guide on what is to be learned. Okay? We should provide them with clear instruction on how to go along with learning using a module. Why? Again, this is distant education. We are not face-to-face inside the classroom. The students might have difficulty along the way if the instructions are not clearly and properly communicated to them. Third, process activities. Every major activity, it is suggested that we have some interaction with our students. Okay? Dito papasok yung consultation. Bakit po? For our students to make sense of the experience. Para makita nila, ano ba yung relevance ng natutunan ko? Saan ko ba magagamit itong natutunan ko? Help them to process the activities. Next, learn. Also teach our students where to apply what they learn from the activity. So example ko po kanina, if you teach them how to write an email, that's the lesson, how to write an email, that should not be the end of the lesson. They should use it in actual life or real life experience or real life context. Okay? You might ask them to apply their learning in their real life experiences para mas maging concrete po yung learning nila nagagamit sa totoong buhay. Number 5, structure the learning experience. It's a matter of planning. Ito po yung dinidiscuss sa bata pag simula pa lang niyang kinuha yung module. Paano ba? Every week ba magkikita tayo? Every month ba? Anong sasubmit mo? Then, kailan ba tayo magkakaroon ng consultation? Structure the learning experience para guided po yung mga estudyante. Yes, we intend them to become independent learners, but it doesn't prevent us from providing them some guidance and further instruction. Finally, also, ito in-emphasize ko kanina, provide feedbacks. Okay? So that the students would know whether they are doing it right or how to improve and to make it better. Finally, give support structure. Dito po papasok yung pastoral or pagiging counselor ni teacher. Alam po natin yung pinagdadaanan ng lahat ngayon. Pwedeng may psychological impact yan sa estudyante. So dito papasok yung medyo pinupush natin sila, minomotivate natin, ini-inspire natin sila to keep on learning even with a different kind of modality. So kung may problema, yun, pwede rin po in order to finish the learning using the module. Finally, let us be guided by Kolb's learning cycle. This is introduced by David Kolb. David Kolb believes that learning is transforming the experience into information. Sabi ni David Kolb, learning will only be possible when students' experiences are transformed into information. So we should help them process their experience. So for learning to take place, sabi ni Kolb, sundan niyo lang yung 4 na A. Activity, you let them do it. Okay? You let them do it. And after they do it, surely they would fail at first try, at first attempt. Madalang yung estudyanteng first try pa lang ay perfect agad. Kahit anong skill po, pansinin nyo, lahat ng skill na natutunan natin, playing a musical instrument, what else? Cooking, dancing, even riding a bicycle. Di ba? Lahat ng nag-aral mag-bike, tinry mo, sa una bumagsak ka. Bakit ka bumagsak? Yun yung analysis. You would analyze what went wrong. Why did I fall? So you will analyze until you arrive to abstraction. Abstraction is the aha moment. You found it. Kaya pala ako bumagsak. Mabagal yung pedal ko. So I have to do it faster. That's why you apply. When you apply it, you do it again. Balik ka uli sa activity. Di ba? Activity, analysis, abstraction, and application. Ganito yan. Concrete experience, you do it. You reflect, you observe on the experience, you conceptualize, you abstract it, you try to look into the experience, to conclude from the experience, and then active experimentation, trying out again with what you have learned. From this paradigm, makikita nyo po, when you experience something, you reflect, conceptualize, and test. When they keep on doing it over and over, they would master the skill. Kaya ang lagi natin sinasabi, every master was once a disaster. Every master was once a disaster. Sa una, disaster lang muna. But if you keep on doing and learning out of it, of the experience, you will eventually emerge as a master. So, how do we prepare and use the modules? Ganito po yung format niya, fellow teachers. Ano? Sa start ng semester or school year, the modules are distributed to our students, yung printed modules. Then, we should discuss, so bahala po kayong maghanap yung institution nyo kung paano magiging possible to, yung madiscuss sa mga bata, yung syllabus, how will it be broken into several topics covered by the module, okay? They will also discuss the objectives and the learning outcomes. Yung po yung sinasabi ko kanina, dapat malinaw sa inyo ng estudyante ano yung objectives, anong gusto nyong marating o ma-achieve using the module. Okay? So as we go on with the school year or the semester, the second step is input practice. The instructor now will deliver lectures. Ulitin ko po, kung online siya at may internet lahat ng estudyante, pwedeng ganito yung lecture. Kung wala namang mga may internet, pwedeng i-record yung lecture and provide them with the soft copy. Sa bahay nila panonoorin in whatever means. Students complete the missing verbal and visual elements in the module. Yung mga blank, may mga left blank na space o space dun sa inyong module. There would be exercises. Ito po yung sinasabi ko kanina, by practice, and the task with the help of the guidance and the guidance of the instructor. And finally, towards the end of the use of the module, the emphasis on active learning. There would be pair work, group work, class interaction, class discussion, and then assessment po. Dito na yung gigradean yung performance nila, yung demonstration nila, whether they really learn the lesson. Okay po? So, that would be the end of my presentation. I would be happy to wait for your comments and suggestions and questions later. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you, Marlon, for giving us a very comprehensive discussion about the things that we need to know about module writing. With you. Is my broadcast okay, Lloyd, moderator? Test. Sound check, broadcast check, bandwidth check. We're okay. Hello, sound. Ayan, okay na daw according to our moderator. So good morning, everybody. Good morning, our administrators from PAFTE, CCA, everybody who's watching right now for this webinar. I was reading this book by, the title of the book, by the way, is How Nonconformists Move the World. And the introduction was very good, and it says that every day daw, when we wake up, we see two things. The first will be the things that we love, which sparks joy in us, and the second are the things that we want to change. And every day, these things that we need to change, we do because we want to make them better. We want to improve the situation or the condition. But sometimes changing or making a difference is difficult, and therefore it's challenging and it's daunting. So what we do is we go back to the status quo and go back to the normal ways and how we deal with things. However, there are some days now wherein we ask ourselves, what can an individual do in order to make an impact or a change? And in our bravest days, the question becomes, what can I do in order to make a change? You see, the COVID-19 pandemic has challenged and disrupted our customary way of learning. The way we gather, the way we connect, the way we understand and communicate. In this new normal, the normal that we knew on how to conduct our classes isn't quite possible yet. Those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So what we need to do is to learn how do we adapt to this new normal. How do we unlearn the principles that we've been using for a very long time in our face-to-face classes, and how do we relearn these concepts and apply them to our classes, to our modules, and to zero in on module writing, because Marlon already provided a comprehensive input about how module writing is, and the things that we need to know, like pedagogical background, etc., etc. I would like to zero in on module and its characteristics based on this slide. That the module is an instructional materials that students can use in the absence of the teacher. So basically, we are going to develop module now because our condition, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, won't allow us to have online face-to-face classes or physical classes. So what we do, what these modules do, is to be there in the absence of the teacher. As what Dr. Chody kanina mentioned, that even if they're under the tree, they could be able to answer these modules and still achieve the competencies that we set. Secondly, the module has a self-directed design, or an SDD feature, which promotes self-paced, self-contained, and self-directed learning. Notice the operative word there is self, meaning module, or the process of answering modules, or the effectiveness of the modules, will depend on self-productivity. How do we increase self-productivity? In order for our students to achieve these characteristics of the module, it's self-paced, it's self-contained, and self-directed learning. It's our job as writers of modules to develop materials that will focus on a particular pace. We set the pace for learning. Self-contained in the sense that they most probably need not other resources than the modules, but later on we have provisions for that. And self-directed learning, we're going to communicate with them through the modules. We're going to direct them on how to master the competencies. And finally, the content of the module is aligned with the target learning competencies prescribed by the curriculum. We're not going to develop modules that are not aligned with our curriculum, because the reason the standards are there is for our students to still achieve them, even though the delivery or the mode of delivery is different from what we're used to. Now, I would like you to focus your attention on this framework, or the instructional design framework. What you see on the sides: key concepts and K-12 curriculum and OBE syllabus. Why are they there? These two will serve as a guide for us to develop our material. Key concepts. If your college or your school is offering basic education, when you develop your module, you have to consider the provisions and guidelines stipulated in RA 10533, or the Basic Education Act. Also, you have to be guided by the different DepEd orders connected to module writing. For example, DepEd Order 8, 42, 36, and other pertinent DepEd orders. Now, if you're developing modules for the higher education, you have to remember and be guided by the RA 7722, or the Higher Education Act, as well as different SHED memorandum orders like 46 and 36, which states that you have to follow an OBE syllabus, or the OBE curriculum design approach. Now, once you're familiar with those key concepts, you have now to go back to your syllabus. If you're developing modules for the basic ed, you have to be guided by the curriculum guide prescribed by the DepEd. The curriculum guide are non-negotiable competencies and performance and content standards that you have to develop to your students. If you're making modules for higher ed, you have to go back to your syllabus. Check the parts of the syllabus and how do you translate that to the material. Once you've properly reviewed those documents, you can move on to the instructional design process. You do your research now. What do you need to teach? what do your students need to learn? Research about the pedagogical underpinnings that might be related to your subject matter. Go back to the expert opinions and input. So you research what they need to know and how you will teach. And then you plan. Now you establish the plan. How will the learning progress through stages? Once you have those blueprint, you're ready for the development. You now face your computer, you now face your blank screen, and then you start writing. May it be paper, may it be the Microsoft Word or Pages. Start writing. Finally, have your local academic council or book committee evaluate your material. Is it aligned with your syllabus? Is it aligned with the competencies? Is it aligned with the approach of design that our college is following or our school is following? And finally, have them validated by experts. Now, you will have a local evaluation for your school, but if you submit your modules to St. Andrew Publishing House for publishing, it will also be validated by experts. St. Andrew, through Dr. Chody, will be asking the assistance of experts from the field from other state universities and colleges, maybe like UP or BSU or CLSU, in order to have your modules validated. Once we undergo that process, we are going to make to be sure that our materials, our learning resources, our modules are aligned with curriculum syllabus, with that our module contains expert systems of knowledge, that our module is integrative and has a multidisciplinary design, and we are sure that it has provisions for reflective thinking and other essential features. We have to follow this instructional design framework so that we're properly guided on the development. It will be laid out by St. Andrew, and most probably it will have a cover, and it could be divided into the course. Okay? You can opt to have a module that is divided into topics like the one you're seeing now, or you could also have just one module with different units in one copy, which is, I think, faster for everybody. Okay? Onto the parts and subparts of the module. Every module or every material will have a title, of course, and a foreword, and then the list or table of contents. So that's basic. We don't need to go about that. But in every lesson, we have to remember that it must always have an introduction. What's an introduction? About you, as writers, will tell your students why learning this lesson is relevant for them. Okay? The introduction establishes the importance of the material to the learners, and it gives the overview of the lesson. Normally, it's written in 1 to 3 paragraphs only. So do not make a novel out of your introduction, because the purpose of the introduction is to establish why they need to learn the lesson. Look at this screenshot of an introduction from an actual module from Simeo Inotech, or the Southeast Asian Minister of Education, Innovation, and Technology. As you can see, this is lesson 1. The title of the lesson is Learning to Know as a 21st Century Teacher. Now, instead of introduction, named the element is, what is this lesson about? So you could choose to have that. If you think that naming the element as introduction per se is quite dry for your learners, you can choose a different packaging for that. After all, this is just a different dress for the same element. Now notice, what is this lesson about? What is this lesson about? The approach to the introduction is by including a quotation from Thomas Friedman. Including quotations for your introduction is fine. It doesn't violate any copyright infringement or issue. And then, in your introduction, you talk directly to your learners. That's why, in the entirety of the module, we use the second person point of view. The second person point of view has the you pronoun. So you always communicate using that. Okay? It's always imperative. Do you know on the average? Can you do this? That's how you work on your sentence construction for module writing. Title of the element is begin. Again, same element, it's just the introduction, different packaging. As you can see again, in your years of schooling, you have experience writing report. After learning the different parts, you are now ready. In this lesson, you will be given, again, it's in the second person point of view. So are you ready to write? You can have different names for the introduction. You could name it begin. What is this lesson about? Your journey, if you're trying to go with the learning as a journey narrative, take off, start, stage one, what you have to know, panimula or primer. Again, these names depends on your discipline. So choose a name for the element that fits your discipline or the area that you're teaching. Second element or second part of the module that is a requirement for module writing is to list down the objectives or competencies. Now, objectives and competencies are taken directly from your syllabus or curriculum guide. Remember that the construction of a well-defined syllabus, or for in the sense of basic ed curriculum guide, makes the development and management of online or on-campus or module much easier. The objectives or competencies address the enabling knowledge and skills that we need to develop to our students. Most of the time, you will see a competence that may be too complex for our learners to master. So what do? We unpack them. How do we do that? We will talk about that in a short bit. But I would like you to focus first on this screenshot of a syllabus from Mindanao State University. All the parts of a face-to-face, online, or modular approach for teaching should include the instructor's information. In the case of module, it will be transformed into writers or authors. It will have a course description, which in module writing is included in the foreword. It has the list, the course objectives, and the learning competencies. Your syllabus will have course methodology, how you're going to teach that. It translates in module writing as our activities. The grading criteria, which also translates as the rubrics in the module. The grade computation, and the course policies. Remember that the most significant difference between the two types of syllabus, face-to-face, online, modular, will typically appear in the course methodology. Because it's impossible, at least, to have face-to-face interaction through group activity if our IATF doesn't allow face-to-face or physical classes. Okay? Now, our objectives will clarify the expectations in terms of what the students should know, understand, and be able to do. That's why we include it in every lesson. The objectives or learning competencies, again, will tell the learners, okay, ano bang dapat kong matutunan sa lesson na to? Ano bang dapat nating malaman? Ano bang pagdadaanan natin sa lesson na to? Objectives also show learning competencies broken down into learning objectives based on the curriculum guide or syllabus. This is what I'm talking about. This curriculum guide from DepEd. This is an actual curriculum guide from the Department of Education. You will see their standards, content, and performance standards. Those are the terminal objectives. In the syllabus, those are the learning outcomes. That is too complex for our students if we're going to target that immediately. So what we do, we create learning competencies. we go back to the learning competencies and we design activities based on the learning competencies. If ever the learning competency is too complex for our students, we further break that down into specific objectives. So in the part of the lesson plan, we could have another column if we're going to use this table, content standards, performance standards, learning competencies, then we could add another table for that, another table for columns and rows that will list down our objectives. Why do we do that? Because of the principle of scaffolding. So Vygotsky designed and theorized the concept of scaffolding, and what we do, our learners now will learn best if our learning or their learning is sequence. Pagka nakastructure siya ng maayos, ng sunod-sunod, from simple to complex. Yun yung sinusundan ng pagde-design ng module, ng activity sa module. So what we do, we give subtasking, we unpack, okay, the competencies that are complex. So the teachers do the unpacking, the writers do the unpacking for broad competencies. Now you might be wondering, di ba we have a shorter number of days because of the pandemic? How do we target all the competencies that we have in our syllabus if we have shorter days? Anong gagawin natin? Now, the Department of Education, in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and its consequent shortened academic year, identified the most essential learning competencies. So out of 13,000 plus learning competencies in the basic ed, it was reduced to 5,300. So by 60% reduction yung nawala sa kanya. In English nga po, there is 3,200 learning competencies. It was reduced to 323, if my figure is correct. So more or less 323. The reduction for the English competencies is 93%. So paano nagkaganon? Okay, how did DepEd do this? So the criterion that the Department of Education used is called the endurance criterion. It was the sole determiner of selecting the most essential learning competencies. What guided the Department of Education through the Bureau of Curriculum Development? Well, the guide is that the requirement of a learning competency should be for lifelong learning. Okay? The curriculum should recognize that the role of the subject, English, is to provide literacy and oracy. These are the skills necessary in acquiring content knowledge in other learning areas, like mathematics and sciences. So what happens? If you could think about it, you could say that English has now transformed into English for specific purpose or English for academic purpose. Bakit ganon? Kasi the MELCs that were selected for English should work in close association with other competencies in other subject areas. Okay? Kaya yung curriculum characteristics na integration na panatili pa rin ng Department of Education. Tingnan po natin ito. Ano? This is an actual MELC for grade 7. Employ a variety of strategies for effective interpersonal communication. That is the MELC. That is the most essential learning competence. Now, ano tong mga nasa kanan na nakikita nyo? What you see there, like yung use different listening strategies based on purpose, topic, and levels of difficulty, yan po ay still learning competencies taken from the curriculum guide. So, pwedeng ganun din gawin natin pag sa higher ed. Yung MELC na pipiliin natin ay yung mga... Hold on. Nag-chat-chapit tayo. Alright. Ayan, nawala. Merong nag-repair sa kabilang bahay. Alright. So what I'm saying, employ a variety of strategies. This is the most essential learning competence. Now, we cannot simply develop an activity for that because that is too complex for our students. So what do we do as teachers and as writers for module? We use specific objectives. We use learning competencies that will lead to the mastery of the milk. Ganon din tayo sa college, no? When we make our material. Now, those learning competencies on the right could further be broken down into more specific objectives and activities para mas ma-target siya. Step by step yung pag-achieve sa mga competence. Screenshot from Semio. Ang title ng competence niya, What Will You Learn? Kanina sa introduction, the title is, What is this about? Introduction, what is this about? Competence, what will you learn? Or competencies. Pareho siyang question type. Yun yung decision nila. Kailangan consistent tayo sa mga elements, sa naming ng elements natin. So, at the end of this module, you should be able to equip yourself with the knowledge, skills, and attitudes and values required of a 21st century teacher. Tapos, specifically, all you have to do is list down the competencies. Okay? Here's another screenshot, your targets. At the end of this module, you should be able to tapos list down lang ng objectives or competencies. As I'm saying, competencies or objectives could be labeled differently. Objectives, what will you learn? Your learning objectives, learning competencies, targets, KSAVs, what you should know, pamantayang pangnilalaman, pamantayan sa pagganap. Okay? The thing that we need to do, I think, because if you're in a private school and or in the higher ed, you might want to consult your academic council or your area chair in order for you to have a decision whether or not you're going to preserve all the competencies and objectives or whether or not you're going to also reduce it and also select the most essential objectives. Probably that's an administrator decision. But what I'm suggesting is if ever you do select objectives, please make sure that these objectives could act as an umbrella that can cover other learning competencies. That way, we are not shortchanging our students from developing the skills in the subject matter that we are targeting. Third element of the module is called the pretest. The pretest is designed to assess the learner's entry level knowledge of the topic. What is the pretest? This is just an examination or an activity that we can ask our students in order to diagnose what they already know. Where are they actually in the learning episode? Okay, we can have a variety of types, but remember that the test that we're preparing should always be anchored on the objectives of the lesson. It's congruent to the learning objectives or competencies to be developed. Otherwise, why test them? If you're going to make a pretest, be sure that is anchored on the objectives. Otherwise, ulitin ko po, no? There's no point in testing them. Example like this one from Semio, what we already know. All they have to do is identify, and it's question 1, 3 attributes of a 21st century education. Number 2, why is it important? So supply type yung pinagawa sa pretest. It is yung pangalan ng pretest niya. Objective type, multiple choice. You could have a variety of test types. Pwede lahat yun sa pretest. Let's try this. Situational naman. Before proceeding to the rest of the lesson, do this activity. Ayan, may situation, tapos short essay yung output. So, pwede po lahat yun. Okay. Also, no, if you're a writer for a module, you can opt to include a self-rating checklist. Madaling paraan lang ito ng diagnostic. It looks like this. All they have to do is to check lang. Assess, self-assessment lang to. Tapos mag-check lang sila. Tingin ba nila, kaya na nila to, lesson na to? Or tingin nila hindi pa? Before the lesson, nasan ba sila? After the lesson, nasan kaya sila? So, pwede natin gawin to. So, this is a suggestion that you could do Ang sinasabi lang natin, you could vary your pretest. Basta ang mahalaga that the pretest is there as a means to diagnose your students. Para alam natin kung nasan sila at alam natin kung paano natin sila madadala dun sa pag-achieve ng competency or objective. Next part, element 4. Lesson proper course methodology. For me, this is the meat of any module. Okay? This is the meat. Ito na yung laman ng ating module. Okay. Course methodology refers to how the class approaches students' learning. So sa module writing, how the module approaches student learning. Ano ba sila matututo? Paano natin i-deliver yung lesson? How are we going to let them master the competency? Okay, the trend now in textbook writing and module writing is to divide the methodology or the lesson proper into 4. Marlon introduced this kanina, so I will just give you a more comprehensive discussion of the 4 A's and how it works in the module. So we use the experiential learning cycle or the 4 A's model of Kolb, which is the activity, analysis, abstraction, application. Isa-isahin po natin. First A, activity. The first part of the lesson, you're not going to teach immediately. Instead, you're going to provide them with an activity. What is this activity all about? These are concrete experience and not theoretical knowledge. Ibig sabihin, at this stage, we, as teachers and writers, will create an opportunity for valuable and memorable personal learning. Ulitin ko po, ano? Opportunity for valuable and memorable personal learning. Paano natin gagawin yon? We could provide problem-solving activities, discussion, pero wala pang input. Okay? Pagdidiscussin lang natin sila sa situation na binigay natin. Practical exercises. Pwedeng ganito po. Do this. Ang ginapagawa lang ng module sa estudyante ay to sort out the words or group of words from the box below. So, may box below, yung mga words na sis, madam, etc., etc. All they have to do is to categorize them, whether they think this is formal or informal. Tapos, explanation. Bakit tingin mo formal to? Bakit tingin mo informal to? Notice, wala pang tinuturo si module writer, wala pang tinuturo si teacher. Instead, nagpo-provide lang siya ng experience. Spruce it out. Ang gagawin naman nila dito for this activity is for them to rewrite the sentences, improving them by removing redundancies, cliches, wordiness, and highfalutin words. So, activities or these activities is to lead the students to search prior knowledge and prior experience. May isip nila kung natutunan na ba nila to dati? Kung ano yung pinagdaanan nila dati sa pagkatuto. So in a sense, this is the activation of the schema. Okay? We provide them with an andragogy or the experience. Kasi si Kolb niya, ang focus niya sa pagkatuto is through experience. We learn best when we experience. Okay? Activity because we want to develop a common base for discussion that follows. We want to know where our students are already para may basis tayo ng pagtuturo sa kanila mamaya. So the term can be personalized depending also on the brand. Ano ba tong branding na to? Yung element name po kasi, mas maganda kung meron kayong pare-parehong element name per school, per college, per university, or per district kung DepEd kayo. Why do we do this? Para pag nakita ng ibang teachers from other college, universities, or district, malalaman nila, okay, this module is from CCA. Okay? City College of Angeles. Or this module is from BSU. Or this module is from this school. Kaya mas masaya kung mag-uusap talaga si Academic Council at yung mga writers ng module, mga area chairs, para mapag-desisyon na nila. At para uniform na rin. Going back to the activity, ulitin ko lang, we do activities because we want to develop a common base for the discussion that follows, and this will bring understanding to what the learners already know, and it clarifies for them what they should learn further. Ulitin ko po, first part of the 4A's for the lesson proper, wala munang input, meaningful experience muna in order to activate the schema. Second A, analysis. Taking time out from doing and stepping back from the task and reviewing what has been done and experienced. So after experience the activity, now they examine the experience. Now, we let them examine the experience through reflections, through analysis, through activities that will let them share their beliefs and perceptions in order to clarify the reason for learning. Tingnan niyo po, ganito lang si analysis. Stop and reflect. Which paragraph is more organized dun sa activity? May activity kasing paragraph. How were the sentences arranged? What is cohesion, coherence? Why are they important in paragraph construction? So, sa activity stage, may experience tayong pinarana sa kanila. Sa analysis stage, we let them examine kung anong pinagdaanan nila. We let them ask them information, observation. We let them write a short report on what took place, and giving them feedbacks. Let them give feedbacks, quiet thinking time, completing learning logs or diaries. Ganyan po yung activity for the analysis stage. Pansinin niyo po itong slide or screenshot na to. Congratulations for completing the first 3 tasks. Did you enjoy them? The key to moving forward is to reflect upon the past. Ayun yung clue doon, na analysis to. Reflection. Tapos, nangihingi lang ng sagot sa bata. The activities above made me remember. It made me think and realize that I therefore commit to. Ang mapapansin nyo po, meron tayong illustration ng teachers dyan. Okay? Yung pong drawing na si
When you look at the Veeam availability platform, one of the most innovative functionalities that we've developed over the years is now known as the Data Lab. Now, inside the Data Lab overarching capability rests the virtual lab. The virtual lab is really where all this started. It's the base building block to enable all the capability that the data lab provides. Now, what is the virtual lab? The virtual lab is going to be an isolated, fenced-off environment within your production infrastructure. It's kept completely isolated thanks to a Linux-based proxy appliance that we fully deploy and manage for you from within the Veeam software. We configure all the networking parameters. We actually configure vSwitches and VNets to make sure that everything communicates properly. So we fully manage and own this for you. Now, when you compare this to something like a test dev environment, think of how much time savings and money that this will save you. You don't have to worry about a CapEx initial investment in additional infrastructure. You don't have to worry about additional power, cooling, maintenance, patching, and more importantly, trying to keep that test dev environment as up to date as possible against production so that you know what you're testing is going to be relevant. So that's one use case. So the virtual lab enables several other use cases, such as Sure Backup, Sure Replica, Staged, and Secure Restore. So in this particular video, we're going to explore what is the virtual lab, how you configure this inside the Veeam product, and why this is the fundamental piece to get everything started that the data lab enables for you. Let's have a look at this inside the software. Now that we're in the lab, let's take a quick look at exactly how to deploy a virtual lab so that you can get started with taking advantage of things like Sure Backup, the on-demand sandbox, and other capabilities. The first step is to simply locate the Backup Infrastructure tab and then locate the Sure Backup section, as you see here. Now, one of the things that I always relate this to is this is like a table of contents. This is where you start and this is where you end up. So if you start with building the virtual lab, then you build the application group, then you build a Sure Backup job, and then finally you run the Sure Backup job. So if you start at the top, the first thing that we have to do is build a virtual lab. Now, lucky for us, there's already one created in this particular lab. So what I'm going to do is walk you through all the settings. So if we look at properties on this particular one and start at the top, you can give it a name, and the reason is because you're not limited to just a single virtual lab. You may have use cases where you need one virtual lab on this cluster, another virtual lab on another cluster. You may have a virtual lab at 2 different sites. So you can add whatever name you like, put it in a description if you want. The next step is you're going to choose the host that the Linux appliance is going to run on. So this is basically going to be the host that we target to actually run the virtual machines on. Now, a little bit later, when we look at the deployment models, you can actually deploy the virtual lab that span multi-hosts as long as you're running distributed virtual switches. But for this example, this is a simple walkthrough of how the virtual lab works. We're not going to cover the distributed method. This is going to be if you run a virtual lab on a single host. So in this case, you would choose the host. You could create a resource pool with a specific name if you want, as well as choose what folder all the virtual lab files will live in. The next option that you have here is data store. Now, it's important to understand what this is for. When we run Sure Backup, the whole idea of what Sure Backup is doing is running the virtual machine from the backup file. And we actually do this using our instant VM recovery technology, which we have another video on if you're unsure of exactly how instant VM recovery works. But if you need to redirect all the writes while we're running those virtual machines in the virtual lab, you can redirect the write cache back to a production data store to pick up additional IOP performance. Because remember, if you're redirecting writes to production storage, they're going to be much more accessible from an I/O standpoint than if you were still reading that back from the deduped and compressed backup file, which generally is going to live on slower repository style disks. So this is just a way to improve performance. And where you might use this is if you planned on using SQL servers for on-demand sandbox testing and patching and scripting and things like this. You may want the best possible performance out of the virtual lab. This is one way to improve that. Now, the next step is when you start getting into networking. Now, the proxy appliance is going to be enabled by default. Technically, you can disable that if you'd like to manage networking on your own, but this is certainly part of the magic of what the virtual lab does for you. You're simply going to give the virtual appliance proxy a name. You're going to pick which data store its files will reside on. You also have to connect it to a network. And this is where I see people really get confused. So the idea here is you're picking your production network that the proxy is going to reside on, and you have to make sure that you give the proxy an actual routable IP so that you can access this proxy component from your production network. Now, if you are running DHCP for everything, you could certainly leave everything automatic, or you can statically assign a production IP and all the corresponding information, such as the mask and gateway and DNS servers, so that you can hit that proxy IP on the production network. Now, the next step is if we look at the deployment model. So as you can see here, the middle selection, the advanced single host manual configuration, is one that we generally recommend for most deployment scenarios. Now, like I said earlier, you can do advanced multi-host if you're running DVS, and you can technically do basic single host. And all this is going to do is try to go out and resolve all your networking parameters, but I find it's a much better practice to simply manually put those in. Okay, now the next step is you're doing isolated network mapping. Now this is where it's going to come in. If you're running any VLANs, you may need to map those networks. So if it's just going to be a simple one network is accessible from within the virtual lab, you're just going to map the production network to an isolated network. So if we click on the one entry that's here and hit edit, you'll see your options. You can click browse, you can go through your networking tree, locate what you consider to be your production network, select that here, and then you can literally give this one a name. Now this is also a point that could be confusing. Notice how this is a drop down. So a lot of people think, you click this drop down, you're supposed to have a selection here. What you can actually do is to just start typing in a description. So you could literally type in whatever name that you want this isolated network to be called. And then also, if it needs to be on a certain VLAN from a communication standpoint, you can make sure that you tag it with the right VLAN ID. Now, the reason I've got the Veeam console up on half the screen is to show you here on the left-hand side. Notice that the actual production network in this isolated network matches the name. So if we hit cancel and we zoom into what was already there, notice how it says VLab-ISE, and then you get this long string. That's the same thing that you see over here under the network section. Now keep in mind, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, everything that we do inside this virtual lab fully manages it on the hypervisor side. So when you make modifications in this Veeam GUI, you don't have to do anything in vSphere in this example. You don't have to go create any vSwitches. You don't have to create virtual networks, anything along those lines. Everything is fully managed through the Veeam GUI. Now, if we hit next, this is also a point that could be confusing. So this is where you're actually attaching a VNIC to the proxy appliance, virtual network adapter. Now, if it's just a basic network and you just want the one VNIC doing one network translation, then you're just going to see one entry. Now, here's the problem that I see a lot of people bumping into. What you're trying to do here when you're setting the IP address is you have to set this IP address to your production gateway's IP address, which seems like something you shouldn't do because it seems like you're setting yourself up for a network IP conflict. But in reality, what this is doing is posing as the default gateway on this isolated network. And if we take a step back and look at what the virtual lab is doing, remember, any VM that gets turned on inside this isolated virtual lab will not have a direct connection to production. What they will be connected to is this isolated network that we created in the previous step. So for an example, if you've got a production VM that you're running inside this isolated environment and it was statically set from an IP standpoint, it's going to be looking for .1 in this IP scheme for the production gateway. So if you didn't set this on this particular VNIC so this proxy appliance can pose as the default gateway, you simply won't be able to communicate with that VM, right? No network traffic will be routed because the gateway will be inaccessible. So it's important to remember to always set this IP to match the production gateway's IP. Same thing with the mask. It needs to match what is set in production. All right. Now, below, this is where you're modifying the masquerade. Now, the reason we use masqueraded IP addresses is so that proxy appliance can do the translation. So when you do the masqueraded IP scheme, you can enter in whatever you like as long as it is a non-routable IP. You certainly don't want to use any IP range that's routable. This needs to be a non-routable IP address. Now, by default, the Veeam server will have all these routes in the route table, but that's the only machine that will natively know how to access these virtual machines. Okay, now, if you need to enable DHCP on this virtual appliance, you can do this, but I would only recommend turning this on if you weren't in an environment where everything was statically set. If everything is statically set in your infrastructure, there's no need to run DHCP, so I would leave it turned off. But if you don't have, anything static set, this is where you can create that DHCP service. So any of those VMs that get fired up with DHCP will pull an IP from the proxy appliance. Okay, now the next step, also very important. I said just a moment ago that by default, only the route table of the Veeam backup server will know how to access the VMs. So if you want to create static address mapping, so static IPs, this is where you can do this. You can actually check this box and add in a static route that maps over to the masquerade IP, which is called the access IP, for the virtual machine. So where this is useful is, let's say for an example, you want to give a SQL DBA access to instances of their SQL servers running inside the data lab, but you don't want them to have to bounce to the Veeam server, then access their SQL VMs inside the virtual lab. Ideally, it'd be much easier if you could simply give them a routable IP on the production LAN that would actually wind up inside the virtual lab. And that's exactly what you're doing here. So what you're doing is, let's say for an example, 10.0.0.10 is the production IP address of, let's say, your SQL server. Then what you would do is say 10.0.0, let's say 110, as long as this is not a routable IP, as long as nobody else is using .110, would then route to its isolated access IP inside the data lab. So what that means is you can now go to the SQL DBA and say, anytime you need to do testing and patching and DevOps or whatever the case is, custom queries and scripting, make sure you don't hit 10.0.0.10, because that's going to be your production SQL server. Hit 10.0.0.110, and you're actually going to be accessing that instance that's inside the virtual lab, where we can destroy all the changes simply by shutting it down. It's truly a sandbox environment at that point. Now, again, it's optional. You don't have to enable static IPs, but I find these to be very, very useful because you don't have to worry about, modifying any route tables on other machines. You simply set up static IPs here and give whoever needs access a real routable IP that's available that you've set up here on the production LAN. Okay, so the last step is simply hit ready to apply. We're not going to do this since it's already deployed, but this is just going to give you a summary of everything that we've modified that Veeam is now about to go talk to the hypervisor, in this case vSphere, and actually create and configure all these different resources that you've set up in this Veeam GUI. So that's how you get started, guys, with virtual labs. Again, you can have one or many of these, and they have a ton of use cases within our platform, whether it's for sure backup, for sure replica, staged restore, secure restore, on-demand sandbox from stored snapshots. There's a ton of use cases, but to get started with any of those, the foundational component that you've got to deploy and make sure works properly is the virtual lab. For additional information, make sure to check out veeam.com under Learn, and you'll find a lot more details as well as documentation on how to walk through the setup of the virtual lab. Thanks so much for watching the video, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Tomorrow, in just 13 hours, Veeam V10 is coming out. And today, I'm going to focus this video on the agent install process. And as a Veeam Vanguard, actually I talk a little bit about that trip here, one of the perks is you get early access to code. I'll also mention the server. The system that I have Windows running on right now is this motherboard. And I'll show you the remote desktop connection to that system in a moment. The NAS that I'm backing up to is right here. All right, and then finally a little bit more about the system here. The Gigabyte motherboard has IPMI, I've turned it on, all that. Here's the Synology NAS I mentioned, and it's going to be a little degraded in performance because it's doing a checking parity consistency task because I just created the volume that we're going to back up to. That's okay, this isn't really going to be a speed test today. I've done this before, like backing up from one NVMe drive to another. Today's about the functionality, so let's get started with the functionality. And there's that network share I was mentioning. All right, so remember I mentioned I have a remote desktop connection? There it is. Great. This is the machine we're going to back up, Gigabyte system I was telling you about. And how about I hit Windows plus E key, bring up Explorer, and let's have a look. How much storage is on this guy? How much storage is used, I should say. About 113 gig. So this is going to be a pretty sizable backup. And you'll notice I have everything showing the system tray. Oh, other than that, all right. Now I have everything showing the system tray. And I even have a little task manager. Let's kind of call that our sense of how busy the CPU is during this install process. We'll be able to kind of keep tabs on things like I like to do during these videos. All right, so I've already downloaded Veeam Agent. And I'm going to go ahead and launch the executable. And this process doesn't look that different than the version 3 versions you might be used to, but I found the seamless upgrade to 4.0 pretty darn good. No database issues, really nothing to do other than just run the installer. Now, if you wait a little bit after the GA date, probably later February I'm guessing, you'll be able to update right from within your Veeam Agent 3. something to go to the latest version. But early days, you're probably going to need to download 4 manually and just install it from there. So we can close that window now. I'm going to go ahead and install. Okay, in my case, I'm not backing up to an external USB drive. I'm going to back up to a network share. Hit Next, and now it offers the Veeam Recovery Media step. This is crucial. I highly recommend you go ahead and do that. Creating the ISO and making it bootable, or actually making a USB drive bootable recovery process, that hasn't really changed substantially. And I have videos, actually more than one video, covering that. So this is going to be focused just on that first backup and the 4.0, 4.x install experience. So yes, I'm going to go ahead and run the wizard. And what I'm going to do is just let it make the ISO. And that only took about, was it 2-3 minutes? We looked at the clock here carefully, and the CPU wasn't particularly taxed. So I can easily use my workstation while that install happened. This is a pretty fresh machine though. And you know me, I like to dig under the covers just a little bit. Let's see what happened here. So what do we see installed on this machine? All right. So if we look at Windows, this is what a Windows 1909 install looks like. I got Camtasia on there, and I was doing a bit of video editing on this machine, just testing out the speed. And then Veeam Agent, of course, when we click on it, we'll see the version right there. All right. So the runtime and database, not noticeable from here, really. Let's move right back to the wizard and follow along with that. Okay, so it's offering to make an ISO image. Cool. And I'm going to leave it alone. Install the network adapter, the driver, so that if I want to restore on this machine, I'll be able to see a network share. Absolutely. So I'm just going to leave it alone. Now, encryption is a whole other topic. And I would encourage you to do encryption. Notice it uses the host name, this desktop that I'm RDP to. And remember I mentioned we're on 1909 here. Despite what it says in the bottom right, the wallpaper's wrong. There's a little bug there in Windows. But anyhow, we're on build 1909, absolutely. So it's a local folder. So just hit next. and let her rip. Now here's a nice little tip. You might be impatient type. You like to get work done and focus on the task at hand and not have to go back and do something else for 2-3 minutes while it's creating this. So what you can do is just hit the start button and just start typing. Now you might have seen there were some green icons already showing. But yeah, I can just run Veeam Agent from Microsoft Windows. Would I like to install a license file? Heck yes. I like backups to happen even if my network connection's down, if I'm on a laptop or a portable machine. I tend to say yes to the workstation version when possible rather than the free version. When traveling, pretty cool that your laptop can do a daily backup and recover files from it all. And when it connects to a network share again or you VPN into your home network, it'll get that daily backup resumed very quickly because it's been doing daily backups all along just to a local drive rather than over a network. Did you follow all that? All right. So let me just take a moment to install the license file. Grayed out for workstation at the moment. Interesting. Okay. So once you get a legit key in there, we're good to go. And that's it. Okay. Notice it says recovery media has not been created. That's true. It's still working on that over on the right side there. Okay. That's not going to happen while you have the product running another window here. All right, it's still gray, so let's just close that. Now, what do we have here in our tray? We've got Veeam. Cool. All right, like a normal person who does things sequentially, you end up with a tray icon when you're done. It's got a little question mark on it. Gets my attention, so if I double click on the tray icon, nice. It scans for stuff to back up to and what to back up. So that's the way to do it. Just let it finish. A little smoother experience there. Okay, I'm going to leave that job name alone. I'm going to back up the entire computer. And I'm going to a network share. All right, I happen to have the network share on my clipboard here on my other screen. So that's my Synology name. That's my Veeam Backups folder. But you want to populate it. You want to make sure it's working by clicking that groovy populate button there. And there you go. 17.4 terabytes. That should do, given I have only 113 gigabytes to back up. Okay. We can crank up the number of days. Highly recommend going to advanced. And remember what I mentioned about some of the settings here? Let's go through them from left to right. I am not going to touch those. You can read here. It gives you a good sense of what's going on here. Maintenance, I'm actually going to also leave alone, but some of these features are new, so if you haven't seen 4.0 before, or any 4.x version, this might be new to you. Okay, this is pretty cool. So it can do health checks on a regular basis. And then finally, storage. Okay, I always encrypt. Next, backup cache. This is a cool feature I told you that's available in Workstation, where it'll do a backup no matter what. Love that. So we go to the C drive, make a new folder, and give it a pretty evident name like that. It should work. And then pick a size accordingly. So if you're regularly editing video files that are 100 gig in size, well, you need to crank that up. I'm going to leave 10 alone for this particular workstation. It's going to do it daily, 12:30 a.m. And this machine doesn't have S3 states like a full laptop would, so we're going to skip past that warning and run the job when finished. Heck yeah, why not? All right, and let her rip. So now we can look at CPU, because that's what I like to do. I like to look at how a product works when I run it. It's part of the point of these videos. So, what is it doing? Well, this is going to be very much like the other videos I've done covering backup products, including Veeam. And that is not a whole lot going on with the network share yet. it's preparing, it's looking, there's change block tracking. So this is our very first backups. It's a little different than watching a regular backup. And we're on a Samsung 970 EVO. This is a NVMe drive. So speedy local drive here. So very low on CPU utilization. If we were on a spinning drive, you might see a little different performance here. And then when the backup actually starts, you'll see some bits start flying at a more substantial speed on the Ethernet wire there. And over in the network share, you'll see evidence of that stuff landing. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, we're back, not in remote desktop, we're now in the Synology NAS. And we've got this folder. And let's have a look at how the Veeam backups folder is looking. Okay, we've got a job going here. And it's only 25 meg in size. So if we hit refresh, not really growing with much speed yet, right? So remember I told you it's got some work to do before the backup really gets going and hitting the wire. All right, let's watch the Ethernet go. You just saw the disk spike a little there. See that? So even an NVMe drive, very briefly, was hit a little bit hard, and now we're hitting the network. This is a 1 gigabit network, I'll point that out. I wish I had the 10 gig going for the purpose of this video. That Synology does have a 10 gig. It's a choice between a SSD for caching, which I don't currently have, or 10 gig. But anyhow, this will give you a pretty good idea of the speed without me focusing on speed. As I mentioned earlier, that's not the point of this test. Functionality. I've shown you all the functionality now. You now know how to create a daily backup and, of course, install the product. That was super easy. If nothing else, you should get the vibe here that in well under 10 minutes, between downloading, installing the license key, answering a few little wizard questions and kicking off that backup and walking away for the night, or just using your workstation, because this is only a 4-core machine. It's pretty modest. With hyperthreading, it shows 8. You can use this machine. This utilization is low. It could be rendering 4K videos right now, or use, whatever. So that's the point here, that very lightweight, quick, easy install. That's how Veeam has impressed many people for many years now. Okay, bringing this video in for a landing. If you right-click on this screen, you can change to this. So you'll see we've been backing up for almost 3 minutes. And let's head back to Task Manager and see how that's doing. And the Ethernet wire is staying nice and smooth. One more peek at Synology. Hit refresh over here. There we go. We're almost at 8 gig size. So this thing is flying. And that's even with the Synology doing some sort of background task here. But actually the Synology NAS doesn't look bad. 25%. It's been a long day. 27%. All right. Back to RDP. I'm going to go ahead and let that finish. Call it a wrap. Put out this quick video for folks to get a taste of 4.x. They haven't tried it yet or haven't decided what they're doing with, free or workstation. There'll be a whole lot of bloggers talking about V10 tomorrow. And I wish I had a chance to get my hands on this code a little earlier. Actually, the code was available to me, but the more recent build is the one I was interested in, not the one a month plus ago. So this should accurately reflect what you're going to see in the GA level product. And other videos have already covered, like enable email notifications. I've gone through all these buttons many times. Those have not changed. Things like enable email notification and setting up a Gmail account to allow that through and so forth. Hit the About screen here and you'll see that I am up to date. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when I click that button now and tomorrow and 2 weeks from now, where I might get a later point release at some point. And hopefully you soon are able to upgrade your 3.x to 4.x. And I would encourage you to double check the version of Windows you're on is supported. Right now I'm in kind of a funny state in that, when 1909 first came out, it wasn't supported with the 3.x version that was out there. So you'll always want to watch out for that. The lag, the delay before support for a new version of Windows is pretty short now these days with Veeam. But you always want to be aware of that. Nothing in my video, supersedes that. Notice how I got back to the backup progress window. Pretty much everything right in there. Very simple UI, right? I think you already figured that out. Okay. You don't need to watch that UI. You can even click X. It's not like, oh no, I just broke my backup. It's still working. Hover your mouse over there and it shows what percent's done. All right, it's a little while later. And I kicked off a second backup. And the disk got busy and actually just scrolled off for a few seconds. And then the network got busy. And now it's wrapping up. The network is not busy anymore. It's just doing some sort of housekeeping, and you'll see that subsequent backups after that first backup are way faster. Change it to duration. Hover your mouse over it, and pretty cool, right? You click on it for details. There you go. So if you want all the nerdy details, they're there for you. At any point, you can close that, bring them right back up by double-clicking here. Here's the first backup job. It even tells you the speed over the wire. Here's the subsequent backup job. And that's what daily backups will look like. Tiny and speedy. 2 minutes, 35 seconds. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching. And thanks for visiting Tinker Try IT at Home. I really appreciate it. Bye now. Tonight, I finally get to show you Veeam Endpoint Backup 1.1 running on the released version of Windows 10 Pro in this case. And what do we have here? Well, if I do start run WinVer, there's our Windows 10 and the build number, build 10.240. How about start run or Windows plus R MS Info 32? So this is a 8-core Xeon processor, 64 gig of RAM, and a nice speedy SSD for my C drive. Let me give you a quick look at that, and then we'll get started with installing and using Veeam to completely back up this system and then restore it. So Veeam is on my 2 terabyte SSD. That's a Samsung 850 EVO. Okay, so now you'll see that this is an EFI system and an NTFS partition. So let's get started. The only thing I did was installed Windows 10, booted it, and fired up this browser page, the home page, to click on this article and show you how do you get started with this. So of course you'll want to download it to get started. So this article goes over the features and what's changed, but here's the download link we need. Okay, if you've never been to Veeam before, you'll want to create an account. If you've been there before, you sign in. So in my case, been there before. Now, if you just want to peek at what it looks like to create a Veeam account, not exactly difficult. That's all that's asked. So I've logged in, and now I have the download button. It's that simple, immediate, no email or waiting for a download button needed. So we've got the download cruising right along here. Quite speedy. And instead of just opening it, I want to show you the downloads folder. Okay, and we're done with the browser. Here it is. Such a fresh install that I haven't even turned on file extensions. There we go. So it's a zip file. You can just double click it, open it. There's an exe inside. Double click on that to get the installer going. Yes to user access control. And now it's just a routine install of the software. Okay, it's done with the install. Took a couple minutes. And it's saying, hey, do I want to back up to this USB drive that's attached? No, that's going to become my recovery media. So I have a 16 gig USB flash drive attached, but I don't want to back up to it. I'm going to back up to a network share. So I'm going to skip an initial backup to that drive and just go with clicking next. It says, would I like to create recovery media? I'm going to just cooperate and click finish. It's going to launch a wizard. It's looking for what's locally attached, and it found a D drive. I don't need to change any of these other settings. I can simply click Next. It's going to include Wi-Fi or wired drivers, whatever's needed to restore this machine from bare metal later on if something bad happens. It's warning me my USB disk is going to be formatted. I click Yes and wait. And click Create. Now, while that's cruising along, there's a really nice feature here that you might not think about, and that is you can multitask. Let's imagine you're trying to back up a relative's machine, and you're at, I don't know, a holiday party, and you're backing up to a hard drive or over maybe Hamachi VPN to your home network, a network share. Either way, you don't want to hang around waiting for this media creation. You can get started with your very first backup right away. So I'm clicking on the tray icon, and if it's a power user machine like mine's going to be, I like to see that icon to see the status of the backup. There's a little blue thing telling me hasn't been configured, so I double click to launch the initial setup wizard. All right, so we got two things going on here. We've got the building going on, and we're going to now do the install. Media creation and install can easily happen at the same time. I'm going to do an entire computer backup. I had already mentioned a more typical approach to backing up many machines in a home network, maybe with multiple family PCs, would be a shared folder. And what is this shared folder? Well, let me throw a recommendation at you right there. I'm going to make a new one. All right, so on the Windows 8.1 machine that I'm recording this video on, I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder. Veeam Backups. Right-click it. Select Share With. We can say specific people. And then just hit Share. So on the private network that I'm on, it's now going to have a network share that this person can get to. All right, so on that Windows machine, we have a folder with that name. And in this case, it was Microsoft credentials for a password, right? Trying to keep this video simple. We can test it by clicking the populate button. We'll then know if it can see the network share, and indeed it can. Not a lot of space left, but plenty for an initial install of Windows 10. So then click Next. Now at the bottom, it just says it finished recovery media, so we can close that. And let's continue with this configuration of backup. 12:30 a.m., or maybe you want to stagger these backups, or just leave it alone. So 12:30 a.m., daily backups are going to happen. You have some options there you can go ahead and read about as well. And let's run the first backup right away. Now you might recall I just installed Windows 10 right before recording this video, so at the bottom right you saw a warning from the operating system saying, hey, you're going to need to reboot, by the way. So the first backup is cruising along here. If we want to look under the covers just a little bit, we can always look at our friend Task Manager here, more details view, and see what is happening. Well, not much with the CPU so far, and a little bit with the Ethernet. So the backup hasn't really gotten underway yet. I'm going to go ahead and speed up this segment of video until we're done with this first backup. That's going from one SSD to another over a gigabit connection, so it should be pretty speedy. Okay, it's like a minute or two later. You'll see it's surging forward here with the progress, and we're getting a nice solid 500 or 600 megabits per second. Also, I instantly got a little happy email welcoming me from Veeam Software and thanking me for downloading. So it won't be long now before this first backup is done. So let me give you a heads up on the planned next steps as this first backup wraps up. The next step will be a second backup. So much like a daily differential backup. To make it more realistic and not ridiculously fast, we know Windows Updates had some stuff queued and waiting for a reboot. So what I might do between this first and second backup would be a reboot. But again, we haven't put a lot of data on here on the system. It's not really going to matter. Nevertheless, I can test that. This last 1% takes longer as it finishes whatever housekeeping it is doing. And we're getting a little warning about the target disk being a little low on disk space. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and cooperate. The nice thing about this server is I have this web UI that lets me show whatever's coming out of the VGA output. In other words, I can record video even while it's rebooting or applying these Windows updates. So you're now seeing a normal reboot of a Supermicro Super server here. And we'll just wait for that to do its thing. And I'll go ahead and free up a little more space too. Okay, it's a few minutes later because I wanted to clean up the disk a little, and it's rebooted. So let's get rid of that yellow bang. Let's do another backup by double-clicking on the tray icon. Backup now. And what it should see is that I'm no longer low on disk space. I'll go ahead and speed up this portion of the video recording until we're done with this second differential backup on whatever's changed since the first backup. Okay, I didn't have to clear the warning because it cleared it for me. I had to clear some space, and here's what a backup looks like. So now we're going to get into the weeds a little. A backup of plain old Windows 10 is 6.5 gig in size or so. And you'll see my C drive now has more than 10% available, so it's no longer complaining that I'm too darn low. I'm actually about to get rid of that SSD anyway. So, but yeah, normally you don't want to fill up a drive more than 90% if you can help it. Okay, so that went well. Now, what can we do to get into the weeds a little further? When I say into the weeds, well, if you have never done bare metal backup and restore, I'm about to show you how easy it is. And after that reboot, when I recover this machine, I'll then get into how the product works a little more under the covers, the pieces, memory use, CPU use. We'll dive right into that. So what do I want to do? Well, I want to show this machine is about to be rewound in time. So I'm going to do right-click on the desktop, New, Folder. All right, so we now have a folder called Hello World. Now we're going to rewind this machine in time by restarting it and booting off of that recovery media, that USB flash drive that we created. I want you to see that it's rather straightforward to maybe leave your family or friend's PC with the recovery media, meaning, hey, you've got your machine in trouble, go ahead and restore from either a network share or even a local drive maybe you back them up to. Maybe you buy them a 128 gig SSD and you back up to that, right? Either way, they need to have a way to recover. So I'm going to show you some ideas here on what that backup media you give that person might look like, that recovery media, that bootable device. Now, in my BIOS on the Supermicro, I was not paying close enough attention, so I need to reboot again. What I need to do is, I need to hit F11, so the alternate boot sequence. You need to specify, hey, for the next boot, I'm going to boot from this other USB device. So here's the article I was talking about and a handy way to label flash drive you might leave laying around. It's very tiny. You can leave it installed in the machine, but of course the person whose laptop you're helping back up and stay out of trouble might not know enough to not accidentally delete everything on there. So you might want to kind of set it aside somewhere in their home. Okay, F11 for boot menu. And now it's going to let me specify something else besides my C drive to boot from, like the SanDisk. It said UEFI because I've got my BIOS in UEFI mode. Your experience may vary, depends on how modern your hardware is. Recap, you probably would like to read this article if you've never used Veeam before, and particularly what's come out new with the product since the 1.1 release came out that supports Windows 10. They've had 1.0 out since last October, I believe. All right, so the recovery environment is now coming right on up. It's very Veeam greenish. We're going to click on bare metal recovery. No, not we. I'm going to click on bare metal recovery as you're watching, and I'm then going to say network storage is where I want to fetch the backup from. Shared folder? Yeah. Same thing we typed earlier. Requires credentials. A little tip here would be, if you're using traditional network shares like in a NAS or something, you might need to type workgroup/ in the username, both when you go to back it up and maybe even when you restore it, you might get some errors. In this case, it's a Windows account login. So the network share machine I'm backing up or restoring from is using Windows Microsoft account login, and you'll have to be aware of that for the username and password of the network share. But this could very well be a NAS, third party, it could even be Linux. Doesn't really matter as long as it has a network file sharing capability and a username and password for the folder you're trying to recover from. So I'm clicking next. It's now looking at what's on the network share that I showed you earlier. That's 6.5